JT, thanks so much for joining Attribution Time. For those who don't know, JT was the Chief Strategist at LeadMD. You hear me talk about LeadMD a lot. That has now become the conglomerate and the success of a Shift Paradigm. And so I'm stoked to have him on. He has mentored me through the years around strategy and all of these other things. So getting him on is somewhat of a dream for me. So I appreciate you jumping on, JT, and talking about attribution.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be having a chat again. It's always good to talk.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's just jump right in. What's going on in the attribution world from maybe the Shift Paradigm perspective, or like what are we cooking up right now?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a little bit about how we see it and kind of what we do at Shift Paradigm around it. But it's much like the more classical attribution space, right? So we're doing the same thing. A lot of other people, but we're also kind of starting to dig into some innovative stuff as well. So we'll typically do some of the market on measure stuff, implementation, optimization, kind of long-term management of those environments, all the way through to the kind of the reporting on the back end of that. But we're also really digging into, and you and I were talking before the podcast about some of the interesting things coming down the pike from the Adobe perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of really interesting things in the market in general as it relates to how AI starts to play in, how ML starts to play into the mix, and starting to kind of take together wide swaths of aggregate data and pull them into granular user level insight. And so we're kind of pioneering in that area with some of our clients. But for the most part, right, we're working with our clients to help them modernize their technology stacks, help them drive growth in their business, and attribution naturally is a typical part of that.
Right, that's where the MOP space started, right? Like if we go back to the LeadMD days and just the genuine the initial structure was just MOPS. We moved into revenue ops, and now Shift Paradigm is doing a number of different things. But I mentioned even in my book, like marketing attribution is just a stem off of marketing operations, right? Like there was a point where marketers needed to be able to go back and say, hey, we drove value here, and there was tools that, namely Marketo, that did a really good job of being able to assign campaigns to engagement and then roll that up to an opportunity. And now we've really accelerated that, and there's all these new tools out there that do all those things. But there's always been like that's the root of it, right? You always have to measure and find some point of engagement. I'm curious. So you're saying, you mentioned like helping people with their data points. That's always really interesting because that's the core of attribution. If you don't have good data, then like it's hard to do any attribution. So what are y'all doing there as far as some of the what are y'all doing there from the data perspective and helping clients and enabling them there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a handful of different approaches there, right? Obviously, there's the new-ish buzzword in the marketplace around CDPs, right? You go back, I take myself back and date myself into the early 2000s of building data marts, right? It's all the same thing, and it's just all coming through with different iterations and different kind of buzzwords. And obviously, technology has gone a long way in that world, but we're starting to see really interesting approaches to bringing data together in a unified way, really building data around the customer and the centricity across the customer. Yeah. One of the things I think would be interesting to talk about here too is like that tug in the market, and it's something that I've been contemplating a lot between privacy and personalization, right? And thinking data as it applies to that, and how both of those things, both personalization and kind of the cookieless world and the kind of the privacy side, well, what impact that has on attribution. So whether we're helping clients kind of solve the problem of like what does my data need to look like, what capabilities do I have with my tech stack, how do I use that data in optimizing my marketing. Those are all really kind of interesting things that we like to dig into, and my team likes to get their hands dirty with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. The data architecture piece. Y'all are kind of rolling out data insights, data architecture. Is there anything that's coming of that within attribution, or is that kind of solely independent with just kind of the AE, like CDPs and things of that sort?
No, I mean, I think the attribution is a part of that, but I think it kind of goes back to the purpose of attribution. And you talked a little bit about kind of where attribution was born, kind of out of the MOPS area. I think it was born even earlier than that, right? Even before marketing operations was a term that he used. It just wasn't called attribution, right? So you go back in time, you talk about predictive modeling, you talk about media mix modeling, you talk about all the things that people have done in the marketing space from that perspective. They just had different purposes. So there was a very finite period of time, and from the way I see it, that people started using marketing attribution as a way to justify marketing spend, a way to justify marketing jobs, a way to justify the value of marketing. It was used as a weapon, if you will, in the world of sales v marketing, right? And I'm happy to say that I've seen a lot of that kind of back away. People realized that it was good for that, right? It's good for understanding what value marketing is bringing to the equation, but it's also, and likely it's better for optimizing how you're creating the customer journey. And so that's where I see that attribution piece weaved in. As it gets more prolific from a data perspective, it kind of stops being called attribution at some point.
Yeah.
Right. And it starts to be called, a handful of different things. I prefer kind of the viewing that as the kind of the imprint of the customer or the client in your data. And part of that is what are the touches they've seen, what are the impacts of those touches, what is their journey, how fast was their journey, and you get into this world of having the data through that version to go through. Okay, what attribution model can I use or should I use?
Yeah.
What I think is interesting is you kind of go from a world, and there's crawl, walk, run, and all of these things, and you and I work together for long enough, that like maturity modeling is something that I think about a lot about. But you're in the world where first touch, last interaction, right? You go to the linear, the regression model, the position based, the U shape, the W shape. All those things are based on kind of what credit do I give where. What I think is the most interesting right now in the market is that data is getting to a place, and the ability to capture that data is getting to a place where algorithmic attribution is more and more possible.
Yeah.
Right? And then throw into that the thing that I just kind of casually threw out there earlier, which is AI and machine learning, the ability to collect data, right, and into a central location, so that algorithmic approach to attribution becomes possible, and it becomes more valuable than this like kind of token of credit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You nailed it on the head, like, because all those different data models, like you mentioned, I'll just reiterate it, are specific to answering a very unique question, or to give like truly like marketing to take credit of something. And it's never the goal of any consultant to say you should take credit and we should, there's a different approach to how we have those conversations. But at the end of the day, that's why those models were created. Those models were generated for marketing purposes, right? Some like the U-shape, first touch, last touch, all of those were marketing centric stages. Like that's what they were all honed around. And that's a really good concept that you're bringing it to the table, is that kind of getting away from this modeling, having specific terms around those modeling and looking at the data as a whole. I want to loop back in what you mentioned earlier around cookieless. So we're going to that cookieless world, and I think that's one thing I'm really interested to see of what the future holds there, because as you know, we have all these different data points that we can collect, and you can do it without having cookies. So I'm curious, like, or maybe y'all are working on this, or what you think the future holds within that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reality that kind of third-party cookies go away, right? In the usage of third-party cookies. But this gets to your point, like there's a lot of like FUD in the market around the cookieless world. What I think is that the AI environment is progressing faster than the privacy environment that's driving the cookieless, right?
Yep.
So you have the ability to gather those same endpoints, and you can have those markers in the data, if you will, that are first party or they're kind of cookieless in nature. And you can stitch them together in a way that you can do the same thing and likely better things than you were able to do with cookieless. I'm waiting for the moment of time when consumers and those that are kind of representing consumers in the privacy market find where we find the balance, right? Like everybody, I mentioned earlier, everybody wants this personalized experience, and obviously attribution is a play in kind of where you should drive. Like the way I think about attribution is where you have strong attribution is the first place you do personalization. So like that's how I can do personalization attribution. But people want personalized experiences, but they don't want the cookie, they don't want their data in the environment, and so you get in this like catch-22 situation of like I want every website I go to, every interaction I have to be fully customized to who I am, but I don't want them to collect any data on me at the same time. Right. Obviously, consumers themselves aren't driving what's happening in the regulatory environment, but the protection of those consumers are. And so there's going to be this interesting point of technology is going to get us around the cookie before the cookie really fully goes away. So I think that'll be an interesting kind of dynamic in the marketplace.
Yeah, I agree. I think like even the cookieless concept and people trying to hide it, and I think people are just going to somehow monopolize off of that. Like there's companies that are going to find ways to be able to gather everything they can now and help other companies grow off of that. But that's not what we're here for. It's an interesting topic though. So you touched on this a little bit, but so like the future of it. I mean, what AI is always kind of the big piece, machine learning and what's happening there. But you have a unique perspective because of what Shift Paradigm is doing with the data and how that's getting. You have a really good understanding of how that data gets aggregated because you're helping companies aggregate that data, process that data. Are you seeing any companies that scale maybe do their own form of attribution or anything of that sort? And are anyone that's kind of trying to get ahead of the curve with attribution?
Yeah, yeah, I think most of it that I see and kind of what gets driven there, it kind of gets to the point where people are no longer calling it attribution. I think those that have been around attribution for long know, like, yeah, that's attribution. Right. And I talked earlier about what used to be kind of media mix modeling, which now I see a lot of like marketing mix modeling, which is actually advanced attribution. Right. How am I going to take the kind of the aggregate data that I have and understand not only the impact of each of my touch points with a client, but I can start to pull in some of the things that used to be offline. Right. So not necessarily offline from an internet perspective, right? But not reachable by attribution tools or not like owned media, for example, like things that are kind of out in the marketplace. You see a lot of this with like Sixth Senses of the world and the dark funnel, right? Like that's the same concept of being able to pull all those things together in an aggregate view of how a buyer is buying. And I think what happens here in the future is, and what I'm seeing the more advanced enterprises particularly doing is using attribution in the classical way of using attribution, like how are my channels performing, how are my content pieces performing, how can I make sure that I'm doing more of the things that are working and make sure I'm creating the right journey. But I'm seeing that flip around a little bit as well, is to say I can understand what's happening in the performance of an individual tactic, an individual piece of creative, an individual white paper, whatever the case is. and I can also model real time what the best next action is, right?
Yeah.
And so while you think, oh well, next best action modeling and kind of more predictive based journey modeling, you think like first thing you don't think of is attribution when you think about that.
Yeah.
But if you really think about it, it's just it's using attribution real time and impacting the attribution in the forward looking view of that. So it's breaking the traditional, right? But like I said, it's kind of getting back into the algorithmic world, and you're starting to see people use AI models to help decisioning in that. One of our bigger clients has kind of overlaid an AI tool across all of their Salesforce, Adobe, and their kind of data lakes that they've built. And they're using that to collect data, build their own learning models, and push that back into the other tools and say, like, how am I going to be able to use that data to say what is the next piece of content I should send? What is the best tactic to use here? What is the best channel to use here? And that's an impacting kind of real time what that attribution looks like. So I think of it less as attribution, like if from a rear view mirror facing perspective, it's like attribution becoming real time.
Yeah, I that sentiment lands heavy with me. I think that's just spot on. I think, because one thing with media mix models that I'm seeing right now is exactly that, where they're able to like have all this aggregated data, and then they can say, okay, if I do this, what, if I invest in X number of dollars to this, what is my possible outcome? And so we're seeing a little bit of that with some of these media mix models. But I think, to your point, I just want to like kind of reiterate this for whoever's listening. If you're not collecting data now, like you're already behind. Like whether or not you're doing it well, but like the goal is to make sure you start getting all that data so that you can start ingesting it to something to run AI against. AI alone is not going to just solve all these things. It has to run off of something that is already known, right? That's how it works. And I know that's kind of like a no-does statement, but there's some hate out there against like attribution tools and this and that. But the reality is like these attribution tools are the hub of all of that data in which the future for you to use AI, right? If you're not doing it now, then like there's a potential big miss in this. And so it's really important to start having these discussions around how do we do attribution? How are we going to approach collecting this data and synthesizing this data and simplifying it, and so that we can get to a point to be able to use AI, to be able to use machine learning. Like that's just such a big piece to all of it.
Yeah, I spent some time with a large group of business leaders kind of in the growth space a couple of months ago, and AI was a big topic. Attribution was a topic. Obviously, technology was a big part of that. But one of the things that I picked up in that, and to your point around kind of needing to collect data, there was a big discussion around how do we use AI, and what is the first step to using AI, and very few people's first reaction was, I need to collect the right data and structure the right data so that AI can be useful. I think that's an interesting insight. One of the things that I talked about there, and this same thing applies here, is you don't want random acts of AI, right? Like just go into a business and start using AI. The first thing, like for example, we have a service offering that we call an AI readiness assessment. Right. And the first step in that AI readiness assessment is understanding what your data is, how your data is pulled together, what that data, where it lives, the completeness of that data, and then we get into use cases using your current technology. So people in today's world thinking first about generative AI. How do I use AI to create an ad? How do I use AI to create a script? Or how do I use AI to do customer service kind of responses in a chat bot? But there are 1,000 other use cases of AI that aren't as kind of market forward. And I think about attribution as a big part of that. Is I expect we start to see AI built into a lot of these attribution tools in a way that allows you to utilize that data in a way that is kind of more flexible and more real time. But without the data, right? Generative AI is one thing, right? If you're actually going to ChatGPT, you're going into the mid journeys of the world and creating things based on their data set. But if you want AI to work in your data set, to your point, you got to have data, right? And a lot of these attribution solutions on the market are the first step to making sure that you're collecting that in a way you have the right taxonomy around that. You're building that data set in a way that can be actionable.
Yeah, spot on. And that's what you're really building out within Shift Paradigm, right? And that's kind of you have a whole data architect team which strategizes and builds all, like, it can help teams build all of that out.
Yeah. Sorry, there's something's going on with the camera here. Totally can start to work to build all those things out. That's what a good majority of the work that we do today is, just getting technology and data for our clients in a way where they can see their business through the data. So one of the things we talk about is we help companies see their business through the lens of technology and data. And it's interesting because you can make that same statement about attribution. Attribution allows you to see your business, your marketing through the lens of your technology and data, and that's the core of what we do. And you can see that from an attribution perspective. You can see that from a customer engagement perspective. There's a lot of things that can be done just by ensuring that you have the right technology, collecting the right data, built in the right way that allows for kind of smart decisioning from there.
Yep. This is awesome, JT. I appreciate you joining Attribution Time. I think there's a lot of positive insights, especially for the larger organizations that are trying to figure out what's the next step for AI. And so I appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.